And Nate, just let people, they can message me and I'll let them in if they're on our team. Hey everyone, and thank you for joining us today. This is our Agility Prime Weekly webinar. Today the topic will be focused on testing. Please feel free to ask questions as we go through it in the Q&A feature. Anything regarding the testing approach or what we're trying to do here with testing, and also anything towards topics that we might be covering in future webinars. We're going to go around the room for introductions, starting with Colonel Nathan Diller, our IPT team lead.
Good afternoon, and thanks for joining us here for our weekly Agility Prime updates. Today, our topic is testing, and this is an exciting topic for us. Go around and do some quick introductions for the folks around the room, I'm going to give a little bit more of an intro for the topic for today, and then we'll let our test team jump right in with some slides. So first over to Ryan Plumley. And I'll check mute there.
Good afternoon, I'm Ryan Plumley. I'm the AFRL demonstration test lead for Agility Prime, supporting the work we're doing in kind for supporting these commercial VTOL companies.
Super, thanks. And Terry Cross.
Yeah, good morning. I am the Director of Test and Evaluation in the Mobility and Training Aircraft Directorate at Wright-Patterson. I support the Mobility PEO in designing test and evaluation for all the airlift programs, and with this being part of the portfolio that we wanted to assign to mobility, I'm helping out in that regard, and trying to help design the testing as we go into the and get this into an acquisition program that we can work in that regard. So thanks.
Super, thanks. Jeff Jensen.
Yeah, I'm Jeff Jensen. I'm the Chief Engineer at Emerging Technologies Combined Test Force at Edwards Air Force Base. And our goal is to provide quick and responsive flight test for people in things that are new and haven't been done before. So I think this fits right in, and we're happy to be there and help you out.
Super, thanks for that. We've got Arthur Huber here.
Hello, this is Art Huber, and I work the Deputy Director for Operations at AFRL. Our participation through my office is to help test teams or research teams get through the various wickets of our processes to ensure we do effective and safe testing. To do that, we help test teams develop test plans, meet the safety requirements, airworthiness requirements, cyber requirements, whatever is required, spectrum as well, whatever is required in order to meet range needs or facility needs or safety requirements. So we're here to help in that entire regard, and you can lean on us for expertise as well as team membership when and if required. Thank you.
Thanks, Art. Terence Mckenna.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Captain Terence McKenna with the 370th Flight Test Squadron and a reservist. So joining with autonomy and AAM subject matter expertise and test expertise, but also representing some of the industry voices, bringing the industry focus as well. So good to be here. Thank you.
Super, thanks. Sulu Hill.
Hi, my name's Tom Hill. I go by Sulu. I'm the Technical Director of the 586 Flight Test Squadron. Like the ET/CTF out at Edwards Air Force Base, we're all about at Holloman Air Force Base in New Mexico about bringing immature technologies, exposing them to the real world, assess them really fast, and then so better data, better information can be figured out.
Super, thanks a lot, Sulu. Let's see, we've got Nick. If not, I think we've got Jen Kreider up with some of our cyber testing down at AFWERX Det 2.
Hi, sir. This is Jen Kreider, Go by Blast, down at Det 2 AFWERX. We manage most everything that's not an aircraft or a spacecraft, and we are working to push far left as we can using SDSEC, and we're pushing out a new process, MRAP-C, as part of an overall CATWIG group, and that it is supposed to be starting to be pushed into the systems engineering guides, and hopefully the acquisition groups will take over come January, and that AFWERX will no longer be the ones at the pointy end of the stick. So thanks.
Super, thanks for joining, Jen. And then we've got Dan Snyder, also from AFWERX. Oops, Dan, you're on mute.
Oh, sorry about that. Major Dan Snyder, AFWERX Det 2, one of the team leads down here for Agility Prime. So you heard Jen Kreider, one of our other cyber SMEs, just a little while ago. So excited to be working on this project.
Super, and I think that about covers it. I've got a sheesh. There's our text me. And getting the sheesh up. So last but not least, Natasha. Tolentino is our program manager. Natasha, any other comments? And then we'll kind of do a little bit of an introduction and get started here with the test team.
No, sir. Just for the audience, remember to use our Q&A buttons. Sterling and I will be filtering comments and questions for our larger team. So with that, sir, hand it back to you.
Super, thanks. So as you can see, we've got a fantastic group of folks that are here representing a large swath of our different test enterprise in the Air Force. And it's this group that's really going to enable the testing that's going forward. This, for me personally, is one of the most exciting parts. I did flight tests, went to the French Test Pilot School, and then did some flight tests in the Air Force Test Center for some time. Did some cyber testing as well later on at the Space and Missile Center. So the different points of testing that we have across what we plan to do with Agility Prime, we're going to try to lay those out in the first part. What does this testing look like? And where does this fit? As we've discussed a little bit, one of our objectives in Agility Prime is really to find ways to reduce the technical risk in this new technology that's going forward. We've not obviously flown with much vehicles this size that are doing distributed electric propulsion. So that part of the propulsion system is very different. It requires some interesting things from testing, from ConOps, that we haven't necessarily done much. Fortunately, the Air Force is here and able to go in ways that it's done in the past of flying new things, testing new things, and finding new ways of doing that testing with some fantastic resources that have been provided by the taxpayers over the years. Being able to, we have some 270 designs that are out there. The designs are great, as you've probably heard among some of the folks in this business, that anyone can build an airplane if they don't know how. And so being able to actually fly is where we're picking up in this program. To reiterate, over the last couple of weeks, the first week, we covered the contracting opportunities. And as you remember, those contracting opportunities were really focused on investment in the testing, looking not necessarily to develop requirements and ask that companies go design to specific requirements, but rather we're looking to be able to leverage the work that's been done and be able to take what looks to be a promising piece of hardware and take it through the rigor for testing so that we can develop the standards that are necessary. We talked about last week the airworthiness and the ways that we feel like with our airworthiness processes, we can start to generate data quickly to provide that data then to our civil authorities for certification and bring forward a capability then faster that is available both for commercial capability and commercial use, as well as near-term military operations. And so we're going to look a little bit first in the early stages. Are there ways that we can help do some of the component testing using in some cases, like we talked about, and the experts that we have on here, the cyber testing that could be done, some of the component testing that could be done on our labs in some of the wind tunnels and some of the climate labs, and being able to understand these different vehicles under a variety of different environmental factors and a variety of different use cases. Eventually being able to take them to our ranges and fly in those ranges, again, with a breadth of resources on those ranges. So we'll talk largely to that test piece. And then as we start to transition and we get a level of maturity, not necessarily looking for Agility Prime to participate directly in a lot of the first flights, but potentially providing expertise. You've got a lot of folks on here that have that test expertise, and it represents a very small part of those test experts that we have across the Air Force that we hope we can leverage to, again, reduce risk and provide a little bit better approach to some of the test discipline with the lessons learned that we've taken along our various different test efforts. Eventually, as we start to go into fielding and early operations, we're not only looking to test the hardware, but starting to think about, again, as I said, we're not creating requirements specific that we're going to go test to. We're not asking that companies go build to certain requirements, but instead taking this concept that there's vehicles that are out there that likely have a military capability, and going then and looking at those different places where we can do experimentation, where we can cycle across with the 3 main form factors that we've described in our areas of interest that you'll find on the agilityprime.com webpage in that air race. Going and taking those 3 different form factors across a variety of different contractors, and then looking to see what does this look like as we start to mix our operational testing with some of the developmental testing to see those most optimal cases where this could be used, working closely with some of the major commands in the Air Force, working with some of the other services, and potentially even working with folks in other parts of government to identify those use cases where we eventually would go to early operational phases. So feel free as we're going along to ask questions of the team here. Like I said, we've got a fantastic team from the component testing, certainly a lot of developmental test background and a lot of operational test background as well. So with that, I'll hand it over to the test team to kick us off on the slides. We will have these slides available and these webinars posted to the webpage. Going through a little bit of a redesign post-launch, so expect to have that up in the not too distant future. With that, over to the test team to begin.
Good afternoon. Again, I'm Ryan Plumley, and I'll be talking with Terry Cross, discussing some of the work that we're doing in developing a test strategy for Agility Prime, and what some of the resources that we could potentially offer some of these companies that we're starting to engage with. So it's been very exciting. Obviously, we had the launch and some of the interactions that we've had. Frank had a good discussion on airworthiness that we'll kind of tie into at some points in the discussion going through today. So as far as what we want to discuss, I think that the reason I'm on first is I'm from the Air Force Research Lab, and we'll be discussing some of this demonstration testing as Colonel Diller discussed, some of the component that we want to mitigate risks for, doing some of that testing, as well as going into some of the systems and overall risks that we want to mitigate early to provide our partner companies with those test objectives and what kind of support we can have. I wanted to discuss the Agility Prime integrated test team, which I think is bringing in a lot of the testers early, particularly to help out since we're working in new areas of technology with these aircraft. Discuss some of the maturing commercial vehicles and some of the things that we need to do, such as getting data for certification. Again, some of the airworthiness that was discussed last week, and things like AFWERX test processes we're using, trying to be part of that agility and our levels that we're able to do in maturing technology in the lab to support this program. Then Terry's going to talk about some of the work that's done, Air Force testing, and then experimentation, trying to increase the DoD learning. What can we learn as early as possible in this program, looking at test and eval planning and getting involved in then developmental and operational testing. So, that's kind of the process under the program, then discussing what kind of DoD resources we can provide to the partners. And as Colonel Diller mentioned, there's a lot of test expertise, subject matter experts, and operational testers we kind of take advantage of, getting them involved early. Some demonstration tests, we want to support by providing in-kind resources to these companies. I think in particular, we've talked about flight test ranges, wind tunnels, and some of these other labs that we have, and touch on those and some of the things that we can do. Early operational assessments to try to understand what are the kind of capabilities that are coming out of these vehicles, going towards obviously commercial operations that we can take advantage of and look at for military use and for the Air Force. So I think I touched on this during the launch event, but what we see in Agility Prime is really a unique test proposition where we're trying to accelerate these commercial technologies. We've identified some areas in the AOIs that we're looking to work with companies and start looking at, from the testing side, what progress has been made, these getting their submissions during this phase 1 interaction. And then as we go into phase 2, having discussions of what are the actual risks that they have of getting their systems prepared and ready to go test and fly, and what resources we can align with that. So I think that the DoD really has some very highly valuable resources we can offer. Obviously the expertise, the kind of test ranges and unique facilities, a lot of them kind of one of a kind, and unique instrumentation and test hardware that we can use. I think it's not too much to say that as the DoD and the Air Force, we understand the kind of security that some of these companies are relying on in developing their systems, and understanding what the IP protections they want to have in place, and making sure that we're able to get the data that they need in the right way. So just to touch on here, I think we had a lot of the folks on the panel today, but we have a really outstanding folks that we have on our Agility Prime integrated test team, starting with from the folks at Wright-Patterson. Myself, I'm from the Air Force Research Lab. I've done work in aerospace systems, doing flight testing and wind tunnel testing, trying to mature technology. And that's what we're trying to support in the in-kind test phase. And also getting support from the Lifecycle Management Center, the Mobility and Training Aircraft Directorate, where Terry's from, and he's starting from the experimentation phase, going to be working at, once these systems get to a level of maturity, how do we then look at how the Air Force would actually operate those and doing the test and evaluation. We have support here from ETCTF at Edwards Air Force Base with Jeff, and 586 Test Squadron at Holloman Air Force Base with Sulu. They're going to talk some later about their work. And we have several representatives from AFWERX, Air Force Operational Test and Evaluation Center, from different sites, and they're helping us early on, really getting involved early as we're trying to mature the technology to look at how do we support, learning about what the operational assessment for these vehicles is, observing what's going on. So it's a lot of good folks that we've got involved. I wanted to touch on some of the DoD test resource considerations. This is kind of why you want to test with us. I think that we've gotten a lot of folks involved already, that subject matter experts. In the Air Force Research Lab, we have a lot of component expertise that we can leverage. Particularly if we're talking about developing new novel aircraft, this is something that the DoD and the Air Force have a lot of experience with UAS and VTOL, and working on aircraft and rotorcraft. And also the significant test resources, really unique facilities. I'm going to say they're in demand facilities, including climactic, acoustic, and large scale facilities. The proximity to vehicle developers, I'm going to show kind of a map that there's a pretty large different areas of the country where we have different kinds of facilities, test ranges, even airfields that could potentially we could utilize, and a lot of unique test hardware that could be applied to testing and instrumentation support. And I think that one thing for the overall goals of the Agility Prime program, working to mature these vehicles and as the Air Force learn how we're going to utilize them, getting these in-kind early demonstrations, working with these companies, I think that accelerates us towards when we start looking at military prototype development, experimentation, and some of these big specific T&E requirements. I think the earlier we're involved, that's going to help us as we go forward. So this is a little bit, as we get into specific in-kind test discussions with the companies, initial engagements, the kind of information that we're looking at is what are the test objectives we're looking to, maybe not necessarily, we want X amount of hours at this, tunnel or in this lab, but what are the test objectives that the companies have, and how is that related to a risk that they need to mitigate and otherwise either won't be able to mitigate it or it's going to delay them getting to these commercial operations. Along with that, the test requirements and constraints to try to define what kind of resources to apply for this testing, getting a description of the test, what kind of test support, hardware, and data they're looking for. And I think in particular schedule, as we're talking to companies, a lot of them are working on, pretty tight timelines to get to the kind of commercial operations that they want to do, getting FAA certification. So I think it'll be important to understand what the date ranges for testing they're looking for earliest that can be possibly accomplished, and what's no later than, or it's no longer, it'll be overcome by events if we can't provide testing support. So as we get into more details, just talking about vehicles and configurations, obviously understanding a structural analysis, I think that for flight that goes more airworthiness, but also when things like wind tunnel testing, that's going to be important. Many of these have props or rotors, so I think blade safety factor will be pretty important. Particularly a lot of these facilities they're trying to keep those facilities safe, so looking at any issues such as fragmentation, and a lot of times that equates to needing to strain gauge the blades in order to make sure that they have some gauge of life or what kind of issues they're seeing, and can save facility basically if there's any problems there. Security expectations, I think we have some large secure test sites, but having those in mind with the companies is going to be good. Test communication frequencies, this is kind of obvious in flight, but could also be an area to understand for ground testing, and going forward, any kind of flight test concerns, if we go into flight testing, kind of hazards there could be, and flight termination systems or assurance that the flight will not go out of bounds of what's been allocated for test range. So I have a little bit of a top level look at Air Force flight testing processes. We apply these in order to be able to get to the kind of test objectives we have. Normally we're looking at trying to mature technology to the next level, the next TRL level. I think we've been fairly successful in this process and to quickly maturing technology and utilizing this to mature doing testing either on at the component level or on system level. And we have Art Huber from the Operations Directorate. Art, did you want to talk about this briefly? Okay,
Sorry,
we can keep.
on mute.
Oh yeah, I think he's on mute.
I'll try again, but I had the phone. The phone was my primary means for talking before. Perhaps it's changed.
Yes, that's working now.
Okay. Nevertheless, we have a pretty flexible but robust process for taking test teams through what we call our planning and review cycle. We can help you with all aspects of that, from airworthiness to safety and other aspects of the process. The important takeaway from dealing with AFRL, I think, is that we're a pretty honest broker. We've been dealing with test teams across the AFRL enterprise for many years. And when we see that there's a better place or organization to handle a particular need, we make that happen. We make those connections happen. So, for example, we may refer you over to a Air Force Test Center colleague or sister organization to take you through the process of whatever your test requirements are. But be that as it may, we can help you as well. And we have a history of very flexible arrangements working with people, whether they be through CRADAs or other transactional type of instruments, in order to get the job done, whatever it is. So I anticipate that our many different Agility Prime industry partners will have many different needs, different risk areas they need to address. And so we will have to work with you on a one-by-one basis to find out what those risks are, and then provide you the advice about how best to reduce your risk and take advantage of any DoD facilities or expertise that can be brought to bear to help you get through that particular risk reduction exercise. So AFRL being the S&T organization that it is, we have dealt with technologies of various maturity levels, and we have developed great partnerships with many other sister organizations, such that I think that we are in a good position to help advise you about the best way you can go about securing your testing needs, whatever they are, and through whatever instrumentality, whether it be a contract or an OTA or CRADA or whatever, we can help make that happen. So that's, in a nutshell, what I think you should have as a big picture takeaway for dealing with AFRL in this regard. And if you have any particular questions, certainly we're willing to work with you in this forum or in one-on-one to help do that. Over.
Thanks, Art. So I think now we're going to transition over Terry, discussing some of our overall testing plans for Agility Prime.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. As I said during the launch event, if any of you were a part of that, as a test manager, chief developmental tester in a program office supporting program executive officers like Ms. Rutledge, I normally deal with the developmental test and evaluation and the operational test and evaluation. Those are the types of testing we do when we're doing a major acquisition program. It's very well defined, it's contracted for, we've got a specification, we know what the requirement is, and things like that. We do the developmental testing, both lab and ground and flight testing, to really evaluate that system and see that it's meeting the technical requirements that we laid out for it. And then we go to an independent tester such as AFWERX to tell us that the system, as it meets those requirements, that it actually can do the mission in an effective and suitable way. We don't have that well of a defined program with Agility Prime. Our aim here really is to find what we can do with these vehicles and apply them that way. And so that's where, on the far left of this slide, that experimentation aspect comes in, where we explore that potential for that newly available technology like the eVTOLs, and couple that with some of the warfighting concepts that our users are coming up with and developing, and seeing how to apply that, so that we can take that newly available technology and rapidly apply it to the to those warfighting concepts. So that's why the flow that we have on the next slide comes up with that. And yeah, Ryan, yeah. So we've kind of laid this out in order to one, give the companies the ability to start developing their technology, to start gathering the data that they need for certification to do that. So that's where we're going to make the DoD ranges and or the test ranges and facilities available, and work with you with some of the expertise that we have from AFRL, from the Emerging Technology CTF, and from the 586 Flight Test Squadron to set those up. At the same time, we want to be looking over the shoulder of what you're doing with those ranges. I think Ryan explained very well the types of things that we're going to try and do with those, and it's really key to what the companies need. You know, what ranges, what facilities you think you need to use, and how you need to apply that to your objectives will certainly help you do that. But at the same time, we want to look over the shoulder with our operational testers to see what kind of capability is really there, how it can be effective and suitable in a military environment, what we can use with that, and see if there's any that we want to explore further. And that's where that experimentation phase then comes in. Using an agile process, kind of like is depicted on the bottom of the slide there, and multiple iterations, maybe various missions as we look at that, and try to know what the users need, know how we would develop that, see how the vehicles can be applied to that, what kind of maybe adjustments in capabilities can be put on there, or maybe some modifications we would make after we buy it, and look at that way. And so the idea there would be, as industry is developing their vehicles for commercial use and have that coming out like that way, the military has figured out, okay, this is how we can use these vehicles like that. So we hopefully marry up at the end there in that rapid fielding program, so that we can say, you have a commercially developed vehicle, we have a use for it, let's apply that and do that rapidly. Then our developmental testing that we do doesn't have to be long and drawn out. It's very tailored. We focus more on the operational use of that and do that, but we still try and do that in an integrated way. So that's kind of the way our flow goes there, and what we have intended for this. Like I say, our early on focus obviously are those company demonstrations, but we're preparing for learning how to use these vehicles and being able to apply that in an acquisition program. Okay, and that's all I have on that slide. Did I have something on the next one, or?
Yeah, let's go ahead and pause here. I think that's a good point to pause for just a minute. Because I'd like to go around. We have some questions online that we'll go to. Before we do that, though, I want to give a chance just a minute for Frank Delsing to kind of give a little bit of an overview from his perspective. He is also at the Air Force Research Laboratory. Clearly, you heard from him last week talking about airworthiness. To talk broadly about some of the approaches for testing that are a little bit different here than what we've done in some of our other Air Force test programs, as well as the important part, the very important role that airworthiness plays into the testing that we plan on doing. And then also then over to Sulu Hill, also to kind of talk a little bit more about some of the philosophy differences on that testing. And then from there, we'll go into a few of the questions, talking specifically on this test flow, this test process. After that, we'll continue on with some of the resourcing, test resource questions. I'm sorry, the test resource briefing from there. So Frank, if you're up here, I'll let you go ahead and provide a little bit of that commentary, because I think that's an important background for everyone to have on the different pieces associated with the airworthiness.
Yeah, as you can imagine, the testing is, as you've heard, it's not probably the traditional kind of tests that people are used to in the DoD. Specifically for Agility Prime, there are really kind of two types of tests at the beginning. We can either do in-kind testing, which is something where we're really going to operate under something more like a cooperative research and development agreement, a CRADA, where we provide the access to the resources, whether it be a range or a facility or something like that. We get the door open for you, and then you as a vendor bring in your equipment and you fly it on your dime, on your test plan, using your airworthiness from the FAA in terms of your experimental ticket. And we kind of grease the skids. We make sure that the range safety or the facility safety office is good with you coming in and working there. We work on getting the scheduling done. We do all the things in the background to facilitate the test, but the test is really yours to do as you see fit within the limits of what that facility allows. That's what we're calling the in-kind testing. If we get you through an AOI through phase 3 and your request for proposal includes testing where it's government sponsored. So in other words, the Air Force is paying under a more traditional type of contract where funds are exchanged from the Air Force to the company, where we're paying and we're kind of, you could almost say directing, or at least we are sponsoring the activity. Maybe it's to collect some data that we're both interested in, right? So there might be some artifacts that you're interested in generating, some data that you need to show to prove out a model that you have, which also might be of interest to the Air Force. Well, if the Air Force is now sponsoring that activity, because of the requirements that come with a contractual action like that, now our airworthiness process needs to get engaged, and that's where we need to look into that military flight release option that I talked about last week. That's where my airworthiness team is going to get fully engaged with you on your design, so that we can run that process and gather all the information we need to make that risk-based assessment, bring that forward to the Air Force Airworthiness Office, and get that military flight release, that limited airworthiness assessment done for the very specific test that we want to do, whatever that is, and that MFR will be tied to the test plan, so that you're limited in scope in terms of what you can do, where you can do it, when you can do it, all those kinds of things. So it's not a full type certificate like you're looking to get from the FAA, but what it does is it gives us the ability to go and to conduct those operations on the Air Force's dime to go and do those things. So we have the mechanisms, we have the process in place to make either one of those things happen, getting through that AOI. So we encourage everybody to take the opportunity, read through the ICO and whatever AOI that might apply to you, and go ahead and submit those phase 1 briefs for the AOI, so we can start to engage with you and get those things done.
Good, thanks for that, Frank. Maybe hand it over to Sulu just for a little bit. Sulu is out at the 586 Flight Test Squadron. They focus a lot on rapid prototype testing. And give it over to Sulu for a few thoughts around some of this test approach. And then please feel free to go ahead and submit your questions kind of for this first phase, talking about testing approaches, before we transition then over to the second part of the discussion that'll focus more on the testing resources.
Yeah, thanks, Vidoff. So agility prime's an interesting problem or challenge space. The interesting aspect of it is traditionally in the Air Force acquisition system, you start with a set of requirements. The set of requirements morph to a bunch of actions, and then the bunch of actions turn into a particular product. And then you can do a disconnect assessment between what the product is and what your original requirements were, and then move on from there. But agility prime isn't that way. In fact, it's explicitly not that way. And for some folks in the acquisition side, it's hard for them to get their heads wrapped around, how do I deal in that space? How do I deal with the lack of requirements? So part of the challenge space that I've had is how to describe that. What is that situation? And my assessment is the situation is literally the Wright brothers in 1908 when they got their first contract with the Army. And the Army didn't have airplanes as requirements, but eventually airplanes turned into a gigantic thing that we have today. So the difference between the Wright brothers in 1908 as compared to now, here we are in 2020, is we have 100+ years of lessons learned about how to take technology as it might be, to eventually get into operational outcomes, to drive what the outcomes will be. So the process right now, at least one of the limitations of the process right now with the traditional requirements-based view is it's very slow. So we have gigantic programs, whether it's F-35, F-22, what they might be, they're slow. They make fantastic material properties. They have the suit systems are super excellent, but they take forever. So the opportunity here is how do we get past that? So there's thoughts that when you eventually get into, first of all, you take the technology at the most threshold that it may be, which is the first phase of this particular program. And then when that technology is right at threshold, is you mash that technology and the people who develop that technology with the operators and the right operators and be able to see what you can do with it. So in other words, you drive the technology development process and the operations development process all at the same time. And that's new. So fortunately, between the ETCTF, my particular squadron, that we spent a lot of time supporting customers with emergent technologies that may not have fully baked systems or even fully baked use cases kind of thing. We get the opportunity to experiment in that kind of place. So there's some understanding of how best to do that, which is what we hope to be able to provide. So eventually down the road, you're going to have so this whole situation does not suggest you can just do whatever you want and hope for the best, which is, you know, from a flight tester, which is the fly, fix, fly concept. Fly, fix, fly, I'll just go fly, see what happens, whatever the risk might be, go fix it and then do it again. That's probably a lesson learned that we learned over in the last 100 years, that that's not the best process. So there is going to be some rigor associated. There needs to be some systems theoretics applied to, you know, justifying is your platform or system ready to get from point A to point B, to expose whatever the systems might be to more risk as the cases may be. There will have to do that kind of thing. But the unique part is that road may not be as well defined as it was before. And for sure, we're going to have operators involved with it probably more earlier than what was traditionally, that's normally associated with a traditional acquisition program. So that's a work in progress, and that's what we hopefully hope to achieve.
Super, thanks a lot. So I think, you know, one of the keys, one of the lessons learned that we've had along the way is making sure that we do get our testers involved early. And so we do feel like it's very important to do that, connecting the testing community with those of you that are doing the development. They're in, you know, as you're doing it right now, there's some unique opportunities, ways of potentially collecting data about clearly the performance, but also as we're looking with a lot of electronic flight control systems, how we do some of the testing on that. So we're going to move over to some of the questions. As we get started on that, I'm going to go back and I'll open this up a little bit. I know there's been an ongoing question on, and some of this is a little bit further out, but some thoughts on testing both autonomous systems eventually, some of the potential AI that comes in these systems, the electronic flight control systems, certainly some history that we have in that. But wanted to open that up as one of the first questions in some of the approaches that are thought, and then we'll start going through a few of these other questions that are here between Sterling and Natasha.
So let's go with autonomy. Autonomy exploration, experimentation, when you have kinetics associated with is a super huge challenge. The autonomy in general is just a super huge challenge. So there's so I call it, this is a brave new world. There are ways of controlling risks associated with that. And there's some best practices that we've experienced using similar types of environments or tests kind of things that suggest that this is, you know, better course of actions. But that experience that we have is something that we can provide to folks who are building new technologies in this particular domain that want to understand what's the best course of action. What is our opinion about what the best course of action might be? And the secondary benefit is not just the best course of action, is in some cases, as the case may be, is that might actually turn into a specific set of requirements. Did you do your evaluation, or did your prep work to get to the certain pay to operate in a particular range? Did you do them a certain way? So autonomy, the concepts about how you control the risks associated with autonomy, or even new technologies. One of the concepts that we promote is thinking more in terms of behaviors and less in terms of failures. If you look at the concept of behaviors, a failure is just nothing but a subset inside of a behaviors. But if you do your systems assessment, looking at it from a behavior, that it gives you a much broader sense of what your system might do, including will behave correctly, or you can assess it will behave incorrectly, or what are the scenarios associated with that. So we have tools, we've had experience with tools to help us through that whole process. And it's definitely a new way of looking things. And if you don't have any of that, you might have all the answers ahead of time if you had done the whole system theory process to be able to get to those answers, or more likely you may not have, because there's so many things to consider. And if you didn't look at it from the right lens, you may not have covered all the things that need to happen. So that's just on the technical side. And then through the test process, and we get operators involved and be able to get integrated with OEMs to find out what the best course of actions are, those type of things. Just understanding what the potential operations might be is going to be extremely valuable, and definitely will drive design decisions.
Super. Frank, any other thoughts on that? And then we'll go over to a few of the other questions that have come across on chat.
I agree. Sulu and I have talked about this a lot. There are certainly challenges in autonomy. I would argue the first challenge is even defining the word autonomy. But once you can get past that, and we start to look at the spectrum, everything from rules-based automation, which is a lot of what we see already on platforms today, all the way through to these quote-unquote non-deterministic type of AI or machine learning, or whatever you want to call it. And it is a subject of lots of discussion in both industry and the DoD, and we're working on that. That doesn't mean that you have to wait until that discussion is finished to start testing. One of the advantages we have in the world of tests is that we can define very specific parameters where you can go and do things that maybe you wouldn't otherwise be able to do in just any open airspace. So as Sulu mentioned, we have best practices, we have history, we have things that we can do to find ways to generate the data required, and we can work with you.
Yeah, thanks, Frank, for that. So I think we're going to start with a few questions from the audience now. First question for the test team in general is trying to bring a few guys together who are asking just mostly on maybe how people can get involved for testing if they don't meet AOI requirements, or for associated technologies testing. I know maybe we can speak on CRADAs, how those can be employed, or really just other ways for people who don't necessarily meet those AOI requirements to engage with the Air Force testing and get some support.
So I think that we're looking to how we can work with companies. Obviously, we have the AOIs identified, but there are folks that are working up to that level at this time. I think that there's a lot of good support for. Well, yeah, it depends on where you're. There's kind of the two sides. There's folks that we've talked with since the launch that have some of these capabilities to do testing, and on the commercial side, trying to get connected with companies to help them to mature their vehicle concepts. And then there's companies that are looking to develop their vehicles in order to get to the point that they're ready for something like the AOIs we've released. I think that there's options where we're considering, like mentioned, CRADA agreements. I think that's going to be dependent on objectives that support us as well as the company equally. and we're open to have those discussions right now that don't fit within the AOIs. Terry, do you have anything else to add?
Yeah, I think the only other thing I could add is part of the offering that's out there is an RFI that you can also respond to, and just tell us what you do have, and so we can start to talk about that. So,
and the other piece I would offer too is, you know, Agility Prime is one piece of the overall DoD community, and so if you have, we have a lot of other partners in DoD. Again, with our focus, we want to make sure that we're putting our efforts towards kind of the primary strategy that's been laid out by our leadership. That said, we certainly see the value in these other associated technologies, the early opportunities, and there are other entities inside of Air Force Research Laboratory doing a lot of interesting work where there may be opportunities for CRADA, there may be opportunities for other SBIRs that are there for providing some funding. Clearly, you've got organizations like DARPA, and you also have the other service labs. The Army Research Lab, in particular, has a huge wealth of experience and doing a lot of early TRL work. So even if you don't necessarily fit in, I would echo what Terry said, that submit to those RFIs is a good way of making contact and letting us know what you have, so that we can, if it doesn't fit well within the scope of Agility Prime, we certainly would look to connect you some of these other opportunities. And we actually have been doing a bit of that already. So please don't hesitate to still let us know, even if you're not fitting directly in. Yeah,
so just to summarize, for those that don't feel like they are ready for the air race, feel free to reach out through the RFI and look and explore the opportunity of SBIRs or CRADA's cooperative research agreements with the DoD. Another question that we're seeing a lot of is on data rights. Can the test team just speak a little bit on what data rights they require and how that is going to be handled through the air race process?
So I think what we're looking at in the in-kind phase is having these partnerships where data will be shared with the Air Force, but obviously we protect that based on, you know, what agreement of the partnership is put in place. You know, so at this point we're really looking to support those companies. We want to see the data, and we'll be able to protect it as necessary to make sure that you know, the company is satisfied and we can, you know, learn as we go forward.
And also to kind of echo what Ryan was talking about, please understand that with Agility Prime, our focus and our intent is not to acquire any of the proprietary information. So understand that in terms of data rights, we are looking to have these commercial companies keep their PI because of course we understand that that's how you will make money in the commercial realm. And what we are planning to do is just share information once we get to the request for prototype proposal portion. So it'll be in kind and that data will be shared between the two of us. However, we will not own anything because we are not paying for the development for any of these systems.
And I'll echo that. Thanks for that, Natasha. I think this is a really important piece. As you listen to a lot of the narrative around DoD, there's certainly been an emphasis on the purchasing and ownership of the proprietary data, making sure that we do that. Agility Prime, again, is very different. Since we are not paying for research and development, we're not expecting any level of explicit data rights. What we would like to do, again, this is for us, this is a learning campaign. And as part of that learning campaign, certainly we want to be able to have access to be able to process the data that's coming from the testing. But I will tell you that we are going well above and beyond on the protection of data rights. It's fantastic. It's exciting to see a lot of the companies that are out there that are really deeply tied into the competition here. They understand that this really is a race to a large degree, and that they're protecting, operating in very kind of clandestine ways, even on, clearly fully unclassified capabilities. And so the level of intellectual property protection, the proprietary data sharing that we're doing we are taking steps well above and beyond to make sure that the little bit of data that we are getting is very, very well protected. And we'll continue to reiterate those points throughout, that we're not paying for it for the development, right, of algorithms. Clearly, if we're doing some of the testing, we're paying for that testing, but it's not testing, it's not data that's going to allow, the recreation of your hardware or software.
Thanks, everyone. So we have a question here regarding FAA RTCA DO 178C, just whether we want to use the proven existing safety standards such as that. Anyone from the test team on DO 178C certification?
So so DO 178 tends to go more towards the certification side of things, and so we are certainly interested in any testing that's done against that standard. Obviously, when you're going for a full certification of a system, you need to meet those standards, and so if that's one of those areas that if there's a requirement there, and you feel like that we can help you generate the data that you need to prove out compliance with those standards for your civil cert, then let us know in the phase 2 discussion of the AOI, and we'll work with you to find a way to maybe speed that along.
Sure, thanks, Frank. Maybe the cyber people can chime in here, but Chris asked, are there any guidelines for computer simulation as part of the testing process? Can we maybe just speak in more depth on our cyber testing approach, how we plan to do that?
So first, this is Jen Kreider. I wanted to point out, touching on the 178C, is that I mentioned in my intro that we were using STPA in the early part of our analysis for both the development and the testing processes. And it has been incorporated into the RTCA DO 356A Appendix G. So if anyone wants more information on that in terms of the system theoretic process analysis, where we are basing both our test, across the board, we're basing our test planning as well as pushing left in assisting programs and developers, again, across all programs, not just Agility Prime, and encouraging them to use STPA in their own analysis to kind of plan out and work out any openings prior to developing any vulnerabilities. You just don't include them to start, if that makes sense. In terms of using simulations, we use simulations in a lot of our programs. I can't necessarily speak specifically to Agility Prime. Typically, vendors come to us with their simulations, or they have hardware in the loop labs, or they have simulation labs that we can use, but we do have to go through a validation and verification and accreditation process to verify that it is actually usable and we can count it as valid. As acquisition moves towards agile programs in general, there has been some blurring along the edges of what we are able to test and what we're not able to test. We've definitely softened on what's acceptable for an OT test and utilizing aspects that we can count, that this is what's going to be fieldable. It does not have to be a whole all-up system at all times. So I don't know, Captain Ost might have some additional thoughts on what we've been talking about in terms of simulations. Matt? Maybe we lost him.
Okay, yeah, no problem.
And we may go, sorry, Sterling, just kind of given the time, I know we have a few questions, and we'll maybe put a little bit of effort in consolidating those a bit more to make sure we can get answers back out. I think just given our time, we may switch back over to the test team to continue walking through kind of the next section, which is the resourcing. That may actually answer some of the questions as well. So with that, if we'll take a pause on the questions, and we'll try to pick those up at the end, but back over to the test team to talk to the part. What is out there and available and what could be used by some of the the manufacturers that are out there in the near term to begin to burn down some of the technical risk.
Thanks, Colonel Diller. So I wanted to introduce some of the resource discussion here, just kind of showing not a list of facilities and ranges, but just a lot of the resources the DoD has across the U.S., as well in terms of flight test ranges, wind tunnel ranges, and other kinds of labs and facilities. We have access to the databases. We can look up information on these. I think there's also some open available reports that we can provide as well. But I think that really we're having these discussions of what are the test objectives that we have, and how do we line up some of these resources to them? What's available that fits schedule, and how can we support some of this in-kind commercial testing up front? So that's kind of where, you know, it's got to be a discussion on these resources. Just to have throw up a real quick overview of some of the sites and ranges that we've discussed internally and with other companies as we've been moving forward. As far as flight testing, we've heard from some of the folks at Edwards Air Force Base, CTCTF, Holloman Air Force Base, Sulu, 586 Flight Test Squadron, and other sites that we worked with, particularly in the Air Force Research Lab, where we're trying to develop technologies. We work with Army Dugway and Yuma. They've experience with UAS and VTOL and rotorcraft and some capabilities to do that kind of testing specifically. If we go to other aspects like wind tunnel testing, I'll say that the research lab, we operate the research type facilities, whereas we have in Tullahoma, Tennessee, the Arnold Engineering Development Complex. They operate the production facilities for wind tunnels in the Air Force. As far as other labs, acoustic, climactic, and other labs, I think in general, the DoD has a lot of resources that are available that for development of systems and aircraft that are very much in line with what some of these companies are looking to have and to mitigate some of the risks to get to commercial operations. One in particular, White Sands Missile Range, is the Acoustic Research Complex. The ARC facility, they actually have acoustic sensors on towers for aircraft to fly through that complex and acquire data and validate models, acoustic models of those operational aircraft. And that's really important to have those acoustic models for military systems, but also when you're talking about a lot of these VTOL aircraft that are going to be operating in proximity to urban areas, that's going to be important for them to have as well. So getting that kind of validated models of acoustics and be able to put that through simulations of different environments. I'd say there's also other non-DoD test range of facilities. With a lot of work we've done with NASA in the past, different flight ranges, as well as wind tunnel facilities that they have. So I've put together a short list here. I'm not indicating any availability. You know, some of these folks we're in active discussions with. They're saying, you know, they could potentially have near-term availability depending on how long of a test it is. If you're talking about things like wind tunnels and labs, you know, all these facilities, they're not operating right now. So there's some backup. It could be, you know, in terms of months or a year with the planning and executing a test to get into some of these facilities, depending on how in demand they are. Also, haven't identified any commercial sites. I think some of that you're discussing about other companies that are interested in Agility Prime. There's a lot of resources as far as UAS testing that's going on and support for testing in the commercial realm. And I think that those are potentially resources that could be used for companies early that are kind of earlier in maturing their vehicles not quite at the AOI thresholds that we've set, but there's a lot of good work being done by them as well. Just to expand a little bit quickly on the wind tunnels here, you mentioned Air Force Research Lab. Really, I think we have some unique capabilities. A vertical wind tunnel that has power, that can do powered testing in that facility, as well as dynamic motion testing. And what that's been able to do, you see there at the V-22, they're able to quickly develop the data for simulation based on the modeling done in that facility. The Subsonic Aerodynamic Research Lab, the SARL, they have a lot of optical access in that facility for visualization and flow velocimetry, as well as they've done tests on with laminar flow sections of aircraft. Arnold Engineering Development Complex, I did mention there in Tullahoma, but I've highlighted here the NFAC facility at NASA Ames, which a few years ago, Air Force and AEDC took over operations of that facility. That's really a unique, large-scale facility where they're able to test rotorcraft and VSTOL aircraft, and in addition do a lot of acoustic research that can be done a lot better at larger scales. So there's a lot of capability just talking in the DoD and across these facilities for aerodynamics, flight dynamics, and power testing. Some of these other test resources, I'll just kind of tee off some of these discussions. There's things like degraded GPS, whereas I think this is a concern that the military has with their systems, as well as some of these vehicle developers. They're going to be operating in very noisy environments, potentially, and be concerned about what degraded GPS has. There are fixed-based and mobile facilities to do that kind of testing. Climactic labs, this is something that, there's fairly unique capability in Eglin to do the climatic testing. They have a large facility, and potentially we could think about if they have smaller labs or other labs to do that kind of testing, or fits in within our schedule for doing these kind of tests. Anechoic chambers is J Prime at Eglin Air Force Base and BAF at Edwards Air Force Base. And cyber risk assessment and testing, I think we have some folks from AFWERX that can speak to that in a few minutes. But I think that just kind of an introduction here to the resources we want to look at. First, what is the risk, and what kind of tests are we looking at to mitigate those risks to get to these with our partners, to get the vehicle into commercial operations, and look at what can we then put as far as resources can be applied to those within schedule, and understanding they're pretty highly utilized. So potentially if companies and teams are ready to come in, have clear objectives to achieve, we can go in and have that as an asset when we're looking at what resources we want to use. And with that, I want to shift over to some of the other folks on the panel here. I think we have Jeff Jensen from Emerging Technologies, CTF, and wanted to talk a little bit about some of the experience they have with these emerging technologies and trying to look at testing them. Jeff?
Yeah, hi, this is Jeff Jensen, and this was just a quick summary of how Emerging Technologies, CTF, came about. We were really set up to look at some of these new, particularly autonomous systems, AI, as it is applied to autonomous aircraft. So next slide. Thanks. And what we've been doing to date, our goal is to help people get aircraft into the air. We try to be a very agile organization. We're fairly small, but do, like we've said, discipline test, understand what your needs are. Our goal is really to set up tests that meet your specific needs, particularly early on here. we're really just setting up your test and helping to facilitate that happening in our airspace. We've done a lot of work with small UAS. We have done some work with larger. The center picture is a full-scale carbon composite target aircraft that took the guts of a T-38 and put it in this bespoke carbon fiber fuselage, and we hope to have been testing that right now, but things happened, and we're looking to be testing that in the fall. But the emerging technology, CTF, we really have access to the entire Edwards range space. We have the ability to get you out there in a restricted airspace where there isn't a lot of other traffic. We work with our spectrum management office to get you cleared to use frequencies. And then we are, Edwards Air Force Base obviously is very used to doing first flights. We've been doing first flights and developmental tests for people for many decades. And even though we only have about 20 engineers on the books at Emerging Technologies, there's hundreds of engineers on base, and we have access to all of that knowledge and can bring expertise to bear for your project, help you look at data analysis. We have instro shops and people who can help set up, calibrate instrumentation. And again, the idea is to be able to get new and novel aircraft out and be able to fly in the air with a minimum level of red tape and hassle. Obviously, we work closely with Frank on the airworthiness and things like that. We run a parallel safety process, but is very tailored to the product at hand, and we'll work closely with you to take you through that process. I think that's the extent of my slides, but I'm happy to talk about anything else that we could do for you.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. I think I have a chart here on 586 at Hallman. Sulu, did you want to talk? I think you gave some of that introduction already. Did you have any more? Want to speak to this, or just keep going?
No, probably the only thing to say is we particularly don't own any particular technology or platform like a lot of the other traditional T&E organizations, flight test organizations do. But we experiment with, basically our goal is to make other people's technology better, however way we can. So there's a laundry list of things here from AFRL to LCMC or whatever that we help out. So we have a pretty keen idea about how to expose immature technologies into operationally representative environments so you can get real data to be able to make some real decisions.
Okay, thanks. We're going to switch over here to some of the discussion of some of the trying to early learn for the Air Force and get folks involved like AFWERX. Dan Schneider, did you want to discuss this and get some of the other folks like Jen Kreider on as well?
Yeah, you bet. Thanks, Ryan. So real quick, I just wanted to take a quick minute to kind of reiterate some of the things that you and Terry and Sulu kind of hit on earlier. Kind of the slides that we had there, slide 9, 10, discussing the flow and kind of what that looks like. I think that does a really good job of kind of showing how, you know, the test team as a whole is kind of compressing our normal flow into this particular effort for Agility Prime. And what you saw in there was where AFWERX was kind of fitting in particular early on, was those early operational assessments. That's certainly going to be key. Looking at that flow chart, you could see how the early operational assessments are one of the key elements that's going to kind of determine the selection of the prototypes that go on to the military use cases, the military type testing. Yeah, there you go. So you can see that early operational assessment, that's a key part early on, and that's kind of for the initial part, what we're talking about here for that in-kind testing. So some of the things we can provide even along those lines with that early operational assessment would be working with these companies that Colonel Diller and Natasha are ready to move on to the next phase to where the test team's interacting with them. We can provide test plan reviews and things along those lines, which would really be critical, kind of going to some of what Sulu hit on, potentially affecting some of the design decisions and helping along with that, so that if there are any opportunities for revectoring, we can provide some of that insight early on for some of these companies. Along those lines, one of the things in particular that we have some extra SMEs on here for AFWERX is in regard to cyber. So I did want to hand it off to Jen Kreider and Matt Ost, who are two of our cyber SMEs that we have on the AFWERX team here, and they can kind of talk a little bit more to how the early involvement, particularly on things like cyber, are such a key. So with that, over to you, Jen and Matt, to kind of talk a little bit more to that.
So I've already mentioned a lot. Matt, are you up? Can you hear?
Yep,
I'll let you start with, okay, I'll let you start with some stuff I might have left out already. Go ahead.
Okay. So I think if we can go to the next slide. There we go. Okay. So we'll keep this relatively short, but cyber testing at AFWERX is probably going to feel a little differently than what most people are used to. We do not focus on pen testing. We don't focus on trying to find all the nitty-gritty little vulnerabilities, because at the end of the day, those don't really matter all that much. What really matters is, can you accomplish the mission? Which in this case with Agility Prime is kind of a unique problem that we are looking at. How do we tailor our testing to fit that? Because we don't necessarily have a mission yet. So what we really focus on is defining, or working with our partners on defining what is the mission. So more often than not, the primary mission is airworthiness. Can you fly? And so we focus on that, and then we look at how does cyber affect that mission. But more than just cyber, from the perspective of how would an adversary or how would a hacker actually get into your system, we really look at where are the faults that could lead to some sort of loss. So anyone who's familiar with systems engineering, which hopefully is everyone, that's really kind of our mantra, is that this willy-nilly looking at pen testing doesn't actually get after the root of the problem, which more often than not was something being missed as the systems engineering process plays out. So this is what we focus on. The Air Force acronym, so we have to have an acronym, is a mission-based cyber risk assessment. In this particular case, what AFWERX uses is systems theoretic process analysis, which is also, was it DO 356 Alpha? So anyone who works with us and is looking at getting their air, or going through the airworthiness process, our cyber testing will help play into your airworthiness for security certification. So that's really one of the biggest driving factors is behind how we do our testing, is we want to help you actually be certified to be airworthy. The only time we're looking at doing hands-on testing is really by the time we get to the experimentation phase. So the first few phases, most of it's going to be us talking with you, some face-to-face meetings, maybe looking through some documentation, and really, we won't even be considering any sort of hooking up a laptop and testing your system until we get much later down the road. And by that point, it's more of a sanity check of, was there anything we missed? Is there anything still out there? But by and large, our focus is on systems engineering. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Okay. I don't actually know how much time do we have left. I don't want to go super long on this. If we're running close on time.
Yeah, I'd say we've got a few questions. Thanks. And the other thing too, I'd like to say is in the coming weeks, we would like to do, for those who missed it, there was a really great panel that was done during launch week on the Thursday afternoon. We can see some of that, but we would like to do a bit more of a deep dive to really show what that early involvement is, because there's really work that could be done here and lessons that could be garnered here. I think for all of the developers, regardless, even prior to really entering into the full air race process that we have. So Matt, maybe for now we'll truncate it a little bit, and then if you don't mind, have you and Colonel Young come back to really give us all a bit more of a deep dive in this super important topic, I think for DoD and for the commercial side.
Absolutely, sir. So let me just wrap it up with one final thought. Any of the real value that AFWERX is bringing, especially from the cyber side, is we're really here to help you. So any work that we do, like I said before, it's part of DO 356 Alpha. Everything we do, you get to keep. So everything is going to be shared with you. Any of the suggestions we have, they're yours to keep. We're not going to charge you for it. We really want to help you succeed, not only if you continue working with us, but really from the perspective of as these vehicles come online in the civilian world, we want to see them succeed there as well. So we're really looking to partner with you and help you design the most survivable system you can, that you're not going to end up with any sort of accidents. I'll leave it with that.
Yeah, thank you, Matthew. That was great. I think we're going to go through a few quick questions here and then throw it over to Nate to wrap it up. So I saw a lot of questions on specific test resources, whether we can interact with those, and maybe some public test resources as well, or facilities. And just from the test team, if they could give a little overview of kind of the process where we engage with you guys and really decide what you need and how open we are to what other options there are out there for testing.
So I would say for testing right now, we are trying to be as open as possible. We're talking with some of the test ranges, facilities, and working through them to talk about, what their capabilities might be and schedules. That's hard to do right now. So we're trying to work through that. I think it'll be part, for us to look at what the resources available. Obviously there's, what the funding requirements are and what are the companies looking to test. Do they need to use specific resources, or is it something that, they want to just go do the big test, whereas maybe we can get in faster and quicker into, one notch down facility that has the same capabilities. So we're gonna have to keep those things in mind as we talk about these in-kind test resources and how best we want to, meet the needs of these companies.
Yeah, Ryan, I'll add to that. One of the things that we want to be sure to do is, like you've mentioned, that we figure out what your objectives are. What is it you need to test to develop your vehicle? What you need to do to get that certification done, reduce your risk, and anything like that. Let us marry you up with the right experts here, either from AFRL or from 586 or ETCTF or wherever, even from some of the facilities directly, to say for this objective, what you're needing to achieve, let's marry you up with the best facility that's most available right now. So we want to work with you in doing that. Some of the discussion points that you had on slide 6 about that in-kind test discussion and identifying some of those things, that's also to help ensure that you're ready to actually go into that test facility and accomplish that test. So there's a lot to do there to make sure that you've got your instrumentation lined up correctly, that you've got your vehicle modeled as it needs to be, and all of those things, and some of the more unique things about what it takes to test in a particular facility.
Sure, thank you guys. Anything else from around the test team on that kind of that phase 2 discussion of available resources and how we really want to work with you guys?
Super. Well, I appreciate the time. There are a couple of, I'm going to do kind of a quick run through of a few things that were there just to make sure that we're closing the loop. I think on all the questions that were asked, we had 30 or 40 some questions. Hopefully we've combined all these. If you don't get your question, obviously please feel free to come back and pose it again next time around. As we're going through these, just quickly, some of the questions, where do we do testing? As you saw, really across the United States of America, we've got Air Force ranges probably, in some cases, most readily accessible, but happy to work with some of the other agencies. And there's even a lot of companies that have offered ranges and some of the testing. So doing that pairing is something we're certainly happy to do for ranges in the Bay Area. There are some opportunities. We are working with companies that are using those ranges not so far. We are looking at testing as well up at McGuire and in New Jersey. There's a really great hub there for all kinds of innovation across the spectrum of aviation. Entry through the AOIs is primary, but for the testing, but like I said, there's other DoD organizations. If you don't meet the AOIs, the path to really reach out is through the RFIs posted on the air race at agilityprime.com. So please go to that and submit that information. Some questions about how many companies are working with us. So you saw at the launch, we have at least 6 companies. They are looking to do testing this year. We expect that to be testing in some cases. Well, some of it will be certainly on DoD ranges, and other cases, there are other locations, but it would be testing and sharing of some of the data and some of the learning, some of the expertise that DoD should bring. How many can we do at a time? It depends, right? There's a lot of different scaling, a lot of different ranges out there. We don't see any bottlenecks with those 6 in the near term, but we think it's possible to be able to handle and really provide value to more companies. We've had many more that have submitted to the AOI process, and we expect to continue to bring those companies in and get some results out actually relatively soon on those companies that are chugging along pretty quickly through this race. Talking about the CRADAs, the idea is the Air Force would pay for that in-kind testing through some of that collaborative work, either under no-cost OTAs or through CRADAs. How long does it take to get into the ranges? It depends, but often we have found that we can reduce that. We are interested in working with unmanned testing. We can use civil airworthiness on our test ranges before we've gone through a full airworthiness. We do plan to engage with the industry, educational institutions. So we'll be talking to the SBIR process and STTR process, specifically for some of the universities and research organizations that are out there. And again, if you're not currently meeting the specs for some of those AIs, or if you have ideas for other areas of interest that you think we should be looking at, again, look forward to those requests for information proposals. But with that, I think we're coming to a close of our 90 minutes here. Really appreciate everything that was out there. Continuing, as we said, on this testing piece, not necessarily looking 100%. We're not testing to requirements, but we're trying to help you for the manufacturers get to a level of assurance that helps the FAA certification sooner, that helps us understand where you are in your maturity and the potential military utility. And that's the path we'll continue to go down on testing. But certainly welcome follow-on questions. Look forward to seeing those of you next week for the next discussion. And we will look very soon as we're getting our new webpage stood up, places for you to go quickly look at some of these presentations, have those available there, as well as the direct videos. So with that, thanks for the time. Thanks for the test team, your good work putting this together, and we'll see you next week, if not sooner. Take care. Goodbye.